relatively safe in that sense because you can go on have an hallucinogenic experience, but it's not going to be 6 hours or longer like it is when you take LSD.
Over lunch?
Over lunch or on a coffee. So it's not absorbed through the stomach. So you can either, people have made tea extracts or smoked the crushed leaves or chewed the leaves and actually absorb it through the lining of the mouth. So the last thing I wanted to just leave you with is to think about is the fact that the Waterloo region is designing or working on an integrated drug strategy, and this will be similar to something that has been done in numerous cities across North America, most recently in Toronto and Vancouver. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what this is going to look like. Most drug strategies use what's called a 3 or a 4-pillar approach. And so a 4-pillar approach, like the one used in Vancouver, involves, the 4 pillars are prevention and education. So educating mostly youth and preventing drug use. There's also, one of the other pillars is treatment and rehabilitation for users. And then the other 2 are justice and enforcement and harm reduction. And harm reduction basically means taking a user and reducing the harm, not putting them in jail and not making them stop or go to rehab, but mitigating the harm of continued use. And this could be safe injection site, needle exchange, and all sorts of things like that. And so it's a very interesting balance of law enforcement versus treatment and the patient, and then surrounding all of these drug policy or drug policy papers are social determinants of health. So access to housing, access to family services, jobs, and all sorts of things like that. So it ends up becoming a really big kind of thing when you start to sort of try to actually make recommendations. So one of the things that the Waterloo region is doing, they have a task force that's been working, as I mentioned at the beginning, for about a year, and they're going to be doing focus groups and reading what's been done already in Toronto and Vancouver, and coming up with recommendations on an integrated drug strategy for the region.
So would alcohol be included as one of the drugs?
Yeah.
Because when you look at the last paragraph, need for peace and quiet public order, you look at Kingston and Queen's University who canceled homecoming for basically booze.
Yeah. So that's a big part of, alcohol's a big part of all this. And so in our region we've got lots of different post-secondary places with lots of alcohol use primarily, although there's other use as well. And we've got also, unlike Toronto and Vancouver where they're very metropolitan, we've got a lot of city issues, but also rural issues in the surrounding areas as well. Okay.
And when is this drug strategy going to be implemented, or is it being implemented already?
Well, we're a little behind schedule. So the task force is going to make recommendations, I think, by the end of this year. And then whether or not those recommendations get acted on is really up to the region and the province and the federal government.
So it's possible that the task force is happening all for nothing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Vancouver especially has been ahead of the curve in Canada with respect to especially harm reduction. So, needle exchange and safe injection sites and that sort of thing. And so, but there's all sorts of ways you could go when you're talking about an integrated drug strategy. There's drug courts for nonviolent drug offenders. You can focus on youth. You can focus on family and child services to try to prevent drug use. 20 years later, you could focus on tripling the number of treatment centers. You could focus on tripling the number of intervention programs in schools. But there's a finite number of resources to do that. And that's why, you know, every place really is, every big center is usually trying to come up with their own sort of tailored drug strategy.
The one thing that they have for like for the one that's coming up right now in the next year is the one where they're offering housing for homeless and people with addictions. And they're taking people, going through a process with them, like they have to qualify, and then they actually get housed for free. They live in government housing that's paid for by them.
Yeah, community housing is a huge factor, and lack of community housing is a huge factor in drug problems everywhere, including here. And you know, then there's community housing, and there's neighborhoods who oppose having community housing in their neighborhood, and you know, that and so forth. So it's an interesting process, and certainly because of the way this area is set up, you know, the university will be in there into a pretty high degree, because there are very specific issues involving, you know, large numbers of young people, and with alcohol primarily, but other drugs as well. So are there any questions about anything? I'm happy to stay as long as you want, but feel free to go if you have to.
I'm thinking with the different forms of intake of a drug, affect its social acceptability aspects. Like, I think if you have to take a needle, I mean, that's like doesn't really.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it would. You know, and you can see in the United States with crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, they tripled, or I think it was 5 times the penalty for crack cocaine than powder cocaine. And it was because powdered cocaine was being snorted mostly by white people at expensive places, and crack cocaine was being smoked by mostly black people in crack houses. So there was that. It was definitely a.
Would the vapor form, say, like, of alcohol inhaled, would that like go into the brain faster?
Yeah, it would. I mean, alcohol absorption depends on lots of stuff, including, you know, whether you eat and stuff.
So I'm a little bit confused about the influences of some of the terms we used here. So in particular, the effective dose, is that something self-reported, like the way that works?
Yeah, well, that's subjective, and it would vary from study to study. I used it very generally, but effective dose, I mean, if you think about, you know, consuming alcohol, usually you reach a point where you have some sort of effective alcohol, but that can be extreme drunkenness for somebody and a little bit of a beer buzz for somebody else. So that it is a very subjective term. Well, you can make it not subjective by making a very strict study, but in general, it's obviously very subjective.
Okay, so then in particular, that like effective dose versus these was a self-reported.
Yeah, and you have to go back to the article for not even that article, the original studies that looked at that.
Okay.
And a lot of it is retrospective from overdose deaths and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and then I had a similar question for addiction. Like if we talk about how addictive a substance is there some sort of you know, these quasi-empirical definition that we're using, or is it just?
No, there isn't. So when we talk about something is more addictive than something else, I'm thinking about lots of different variables going into that work, and that's a problem in this area.
When you said that the faster you inject the substance, then the higher the chance of it being addicted to, how does that work?
Because usually the reward you get from a substance is related to the speed of onset as well as the intensity of the high. So if you have 10 milligrams of morphine and you inject it a lot of that morphine is going to get to the brain very quickly, and most of it's going to get there. If you ingest it, so you take that same 10 milligrams, put it in a tablet, take it into your body, so it's going to go into your stomach and small intestine, and then most of it's going to get absorbed, maybe not all of it. And then from there, it's going to get into the bloodstream, and it's going to go all sorts of places in the body, including the brain. But there's going to be a time lag from when you took the pill to when you get the effect. And so this actually gets into some behavioral psychology, I guess, where the closer you are to a cue, and then you get an effect, then you make a stronger association with it. So if you inject something right away and you feel really good, then you have a really strong association with that.
It's not something to do with homeostasis, because if you inject
No.
something, the body responds to that right away, and if you continue that for a long time, then the body kind of anticipates that kind of response, prepares itself, and as a result, it's expecting you to take that, and if you don't, then it kind of falls off the balance, and which is why.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing is called behavioral sensitization, which I probably don't have time to get into, but you can see in animal models especially distinct anticipatory behaviors when they expect to get another dose of the substance. So they go into they anticipate it.
Where do you see the issue of drug legalization?
Well, for a while, Canada was moving towards marijuana decriminalization, and that movement is still, I guess it's a little slower now after the change of government. Drug legalization is obviously it's a huge political issue. And that's why I asked this question, especially for this group is, so do we just take that figure of which drugs are safe and which ones aren't, and then draw some sort of line where if the therapeutic window is 5 or less, it's illegal, and if it's 5 or greater, then it's legal. So that's a very simple thing to do. But then there's all sorts of social and other policies. The best data for drug legalization, or at least decriminalization, is in Portugal. I don't know if anyone's familiar with what they've been doing there, but they went through a significant, fairly dramatic drug decriminalization process. Drug use went up, and especially trying drugs went up, and that did happen, and it was significant. But overdoses went down immensely, and treatment, the number of people in treatment went up significantly as well. So, that's probably, and that's what people warn against when you talk about decriminalization or legalization. They say, well, then everyone's going to try it. And that probably is true. There probably would be more people trying more drugs. But you'd have to balance that risk with, or if you think that's a risk, you have to balance that risk with whether you can get more people into treatment or to use more in a more safe manner. My own views are fairly liberal on drug legalization, but
You mentioned like a therapeutic window, like at 5 or less, but I think from that chart, it's only heroin is the one that's 5.
well, yeah, that's true. I should have said 10 or less, but then we lose alcohol.
So in this talk in particular, and I think very frequently when people talk about drug policy, there's sort of an implicit division between recreational or pleasurable drugs and medically prescribed drugs. So there's definitely a third category, which is smart drugs. So it's probably familiar to people in the youth and university settings all the time. People using study drugs. Like there's illegal use of like Ritalin or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a new drug which I mentioned right at the beginning of the lecture. So is that something that's being dealt with? Like you said, you were on this task force thing. Is that something you're aware of, or is it?
Yeah. So the big thing you think of we think of a drug task force. You think of people on the street using drugs, usually. But there's all sorts of misuse, or whatever definition of drugs. There's performance enhancing drugs. We had a lot of